Hey, welcome to lesson 2. We are going to talk today about defining success. And this is all about goal setting and knowing how we are gauging ourselves. It's hard to know if we're doing well or not if we have nothing to gauge by or measure by. And so goal setting is very important in the music industry because that's how we do things. We don't just like make a CD by accident. That doesn't really happen. You know, we start by saying, I want to make a CD. I want to make an album. I want to put a record out. And then we do the things that we need to do to make that happen. We reverse engineer the process and figure out, well, if I want to do that, first I have to do this. Oh, but if I need to do that, first I need to do these 10 other things. And the list keeps getting bigger and bigger and longer and longer. And then all of a sudden it's a very overwhelming process and it seems like a huge mountain. And so we want to eliminate that and we want to focus on the goal, but we want to break it all into bite-sized pieces so that we can actually get there faster and in a more peaceful way so that we're not feeling frustrated or stressed out, because that just ruins the vibe. So by now you know a little bit more about me and my backstory and my real bio, which is I'm a full-time mom, 5 kids, homeschooling, very busy life, diapers, dishes, a lot of busy, crazy things in life. And I knew that it would be very easy for someone like me to make a CD and then do nothing after that. I think we've all met people where they're all proud of themselves, like, I made a CD, and you know, and they're like almost bragging, and you're like, whatever. And then a few years later, you see that person again, and you're like, oh, how's the music going? Oh, yeah, I haven't really done much with it since then, and like, it turns out nobody's listened to it, and it never went anywhere, and they're all like braggy, and you know, it was like an ego boost for them, except it didn't actually impact the world very much around them. You know, they were all proud of themselves. I just knew I didn't want to do that. I didn't want to brag to people like, I've made a CD, and then it goes nowhere. I mean, that's dumb and it's lame. So I knew if I want to actually have an impact on the world around me, I mean, my goal here is to fulfill my calling as a musician and an artist. And that involves, you know, improving the world in some capacity, whether it's just providing good music or having a good influence on those around me. I mean, the goal here is it's a two-sided calling. There's my end of it, and then there's how the world receives it. Of that impact, I wanted to go somewhere and actually have people listen to it. I needed to learn some business parts of it. I needed to learn how to market my music. I needed to get it from my basement to people's iPods and to people's YouTube channels and to people's CDs in their hands in their houses. It seems so far away and it seems so unattainable at times. It was a very overwhelming idea. And I mean, we all have those distant hopes that, oh, maybe I'll put it on YouTube and I'll get discovered and it'll go viral. You know what? I mean, I'm not going to say that it couldn't happen. It could. But for most of us, you know, we are everyday normal people with normal lives, and we're not the best in the whole world. And there's some like really amazing 5-year-olds that can play the drums like insanely well. And those kids deserve their 15 minutes of fame on YouTube and all that. Like, credit where credit's due. I'm not one of those amazing musicians. I just do my thing. That's all I know. I write music. I love it. I have to write it. I know I don't feel normal unless I'm doing that. And I'm just going to tell you, we're not going to go viral. So we have to be a little smarter about it. We can't just take a risk and hope for the best. That's not going to fulfill our calling. Our calling involves delivering the message, delivering the music, helping people hear what we've created. And that is going to involve a lot of planning, forethought, and strategy, which is why we're here. And a lot of this brings us to how we are going to measure our success. And this is going to be different for everybody because, where it depends on where you're at. Are you starting from ground zero? Because if you are, your measure of success is going to be a little different than somebody who has been doing music for quite a while and they kind of, feel like they've got a good sense of what they're doing, and their goals are going to be different. And so this really depends on where you're at, where you've come from, and where you're going. And we want to set goals that are attainable. And for me, my measure of success, it did have a little bit to do with money. I mean, my first goal was put out a CD. We don't have anything without that. And then I realized, oh, well, I can put out a CD. I guess anybody can put out a CD. These days, technology is readily available and anybody can make a CD. So it's not enough to just make a CD. I'm going to have to do more. I'm going to have to learn some marketing. And and then I realized if I wanted to ever be able to do this as a living, I'm going to have sales. And how do I get sales? I'm going to have to get listeners who love my music enough that they're willing to buy it and pay money to have it on their device or in their hand, get the physical merchandise. And how do I find those fans? How do I find the fans that are willing to put their money where their mouth is? Now that is a bigger deal than you think, and it's harder to find them than you think. But it's also a lot easier today than it ever would have been. And I just wanted to say for a moment about the way the music industry used to be and the way it is right now, and why it used to be a very hard thing for an indie band or an independent artist to find those fans. It was a very hard thing to do, but right now it's actually very easy to do. The way the old music industry was, and you might already know this, but we need to talk about this because it's a big deal. Even just 15, 20 years ago, not that long ago, there was the big five record companies, and BMI and Warner and all the big ones. And it was like they controlled the mainstream music scene, and it was almost like mainstream news stations. You only hear what they put out, and so a lot of what you're hearing as far as news stories, if it's coming through those media outlets, you're not going to hear from anywhere else, and so you don't really have options. Basically, you can only get your information from these sources. Now, what if those sources withhold information, really important information? Or what if they don't report on everything? Or what if they spin the story a certain way when it's not actually that way? I see the old music industry with the big five in a very similar way. I think they promoted bands and artists in a huge way that didn't necessarily deserve the limelight, like Britney Spears, for example, and Lady Gaga. No, okay, she's talented. We'll admit that. But there are certain artists that have been inflated to be these huge stars, and they're crap. We know this. We listen to the radio. If you turn on the radio today, you'll listen, you're going to hear something crappy. There's no doubt about it. And that's because they're on one of these big labels, and somebody thought there was potential, and they made a big investment, and they committed to it, and now they got to make something of it, and they throw a lot of money on it and make it work, and they shove it in people's faces, and they shove it down their throats, and they make really expensive music videos, and they, try to pimp it out as best they can, to try and convince the public to buy this. And, a lot of these people end up being one-hit wonders, and they go nowhere. And then we also know there's a whole lot of really great music that never make it to those big five labels. And now, I mean, the internet has pretty much made these big five labels obsolete. Now the big five is actually turned into the big three, I think. I think two of the big ones are no longer in existence. They're gone. And now we have more and more indie labels. Now we have lots of independent and small labels who really care about artists. It's back to the basics, baby. It's back to good music they believe in. They treat their artists well. So labels aren't all bad. Yes, they gave us a lot of crappy music. They did give us some good music. I mean, there's definitely good music on there. They don't invest in crappy artists all the time. A lot of them are good. But there was a monopoly. There was a monopoly on the music industry. So we were only given what they put out. And we only had MTV, you know, we only had a couple music channels. That was it. We only had a few big radio stations and whatever they put on there, that's all we got before the internet. And then the internet happened and lots of other bands started getting some traction that weren't on these big five. And then, oh my goodness, YouTube just completely changed the world concerning music. Now, you know, some kid singing in his backyard with a crappy mic and someone records it on their mobile device, uploads it on YouTube, and that kid is being heard around the world. Millions of people listening and getting, you know, loving this new kid and his voice, and they're sending him comments and he's getting offers, and this kid's like blowing up, going viral, and he's sleeping in his bed. And this is happening. He's sleeping. While he's sleeping, visitors are coming to YouTube and they're watching him and discovering him. This changes everything. We have to realize that that old music industry model is obsolete. It doesn't affect us anymore. No longer does that old system determine our success. It used to be that if we wanted success, if we wanted exposure, we had to be on one of those labels. We had to get discovered. Somebody had to recognize our talent and decide that they would throw money into our project, into us as an artist, and then we would get exposure. That has all changed. Now, because of the internet and because of what I call the while you're sleeping scenario, where you are, you know, people are finding out about your music and they're listening to it and streaming it and getting hooked while you're sleeping, because of that scenario, we now have a huge vantage point. We now can leverage the internet and all its resources in a way that that's never been possible in the history of the music industry. And so I just want you to feel excited about that, because this has not been possible before. And that brings us back to our goals and how we are going to define and measure our success. And I want you to really think about it. Maybe you're going to start with a smaller goal, like make a CD or make my next CD. What's my next project going to be? What's my first project going to be? Because it's going to start there, and then, you know, you can think about what's beyond that. What's beyond making a CD? Now, this isn't like making a 10-year plan, you know, and I've recently changed my mind on a few things about that. You know, we don't know what the world is going to be like in 10 years. Let's not make huge, unattainable type of goals and plans that we might never be able to attain. Let's make something small, and let's make it measurable, and let's make it a goal that we can kind of reverse engineer and take small steps toward every day and every week that we schedule. And that way we're definitely going to be able to do it. No questions asked. So I want you to, when this lesson is done, download the worksheet on defining your goals and defining success. Now, what does success mean to you? My first big goal of defining success was being able to self-fund my projects. So being able to make enough money from my old projects that I could do a new project and not be in any debt of any kind, not need any favors from anyone, not have to cut deals, not need money from anyone except my fans, for example. And I did that. I raised over $27,000 in a crowdfunding campaign to make the most expensive CD that I've ever made. It was expensive. And I was working with musicians in Europe while I'm living in Canada. And we were working over the internet. And there was a lot of exchange fees and a lot of things that, wow, that got really expensive really fast. But you know what? I pulled it off. I totally made it work. It worked. And I was able to do that because I had a goal. I wanted to be able to self-fund my own project with my music. And I was able to do that because I had done several things before that point that I had built enough of a die-hard fan base that I knew they would come through for me. And then, as entrepreneurs do, they take a risk. They take a calculated risk, not just any risk. You got to weigh the pros and the cons, and you need to know what you're getting into, and you need to know what are the risks, what's the likelihood that I'll succeed. You know, we need to do the numbers on this. And by the way, I'm going to give you all my tips for crowdfunding because this is amazing. This is changing the way musicians fund their projects. It's incredible. But calculated risk is a good thing. I don't want you to be afraid to take a risk. We've got to overcome the issue of being afraid. I mean, we are in the age of transparency, and that's kind of terrifying as it is, you know, like we're being spied on and all kinds of paranoia going on. But we need to learn to overcome fears and take some risks and put ourselves out there and put our music out there. And you know, but what's going to take away some of that fear and anxiety is having that plan, having some measurable goals so that it is a calculated risk. It is nothing to really be afraid about because we already know what to expect, and we've weighed it and we've done the numbers. We know what's going on. And I know part of us, sometimes we might feel like, oh, you know, talking about the business end of it does not, you know, make me feel very inspired. But let me tell you that in this day and age, if you're going to make a living as a musician, you have to become familiar and understand several of these aspects like marketing, and you're going to have to do a little bit with numbers, and you are going to have to budget your album, and you're going to have to think through some of the, you know, more administrative things. But that's all part of it, and you're a musician, but you're also an entrepreneur. And an entrepreneur is somebody who takes calculated risks in a business endeavor. And so we're going to do that. Today, to be an independent musician means we're also an entrepreneur. We're also a musician in a business world. And that's how we're going to leverage the power of the internet. And doing those things is how we're also going to learn how to make a passive income. And there's 5 paths to making a passive income. You might have heard me talk about those before. And we're going to get more detailed into the how part of it, because it's all possible, and I'm making money from all those 5 things, and that's how I make my living. So we're going to move now into the worksheet part of this, and I want you to take as much time as you need to work through these questions because they're going to be measurable things. So let's not write things down like don't write a goal down like my goal is to be the best singer in the world. You know, that's not a good goal. You're not going to be the best singer in the world probably. I mean, I'm not going to tell you that, but kind of did, but don't write that down. Write down, I want to be, maybe you want to be the best singer in your genre in a certain country. Now that it was doable. Okay, if you have the talent and the skill and the dedication, now that's doable. So don't make it so huge and unrealistic. But we also need something measurable. So maybe it would be, my goal is to put out a CD in the next 6 months, say by this date, and have a marketing plan set in place 3 months before. Something like that. Something where you know that I've got a date, I have a plan, it's a measurable goal, and if I put these strategies in order and I reverse engineer this process, it's definitely possible. So I want you to be thinking in terms of those kinds of things. It's very specific, it's measurable, and you're going to know for sure or not if you accomplished it. Maybe it's a certain amount of CD sales, or maybe it is X amount of dollars that you'd like to make per month if you're further down the road. So whatever that is, I want you to be thinking about it. Maybe you already know the answer right now, and maybe you need a bit of time, but take the time you need with the worksheet and go through it. And we'll see you in the next lesson, and we're going to dig a lot further and deeper into the next topic.